The entire first-class cabin of Flight 402 was dead silent, terrified of the man in seat 1A. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was Matilda Moretti, the most feared man in Italy, and he looked ready to kill. But the enemy wasn't a hit man. It was his own 3-month-old son, who had been screaming for 2 hours straight. The flight attendants were shaking. The bodyguards were helpless. Then a woman from economy walked past the security curtain. She didn't have a weapon, just a mother's instinct. She did the unthinkable, and in doing so, she didn't just save a baby. She accidentally started a war. You won't believe who she really was. The recycled air inside the Boeing 737 tasted like stale coffee and anxiety. For most passengers on the overnight flight from New York to Milan, the anxiety came from turbulence or the fear of losing luggage. But for the flight crew of Alitalia Flight 402, the terror had a name: Matilda Moretti. He sat in seat 1A, a throne of leather and solitude. Matilda was 32, with eyes the color of gunmetal and a jawline that looked carved from granite. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than the average passenger's car, a charcoal 3-piece by Brioni tailored to hide the shoulder holster beneath his left arm. He didn't look like a father. He looked like a predator trapped in a cage. In his arms, swaddled in a blanket of pure cashmere, was Leo, the heir to the Moretti crime syndicate. And Leo was screaming. It wasn't a normal cry. It was a high-pitched, jagged shriek that grated against the nerves and made teeth ache. It had been going on for 90 minutes. "Sir." The lead flight attendant, a woman named Beatrice, who had been flying for 20 years, approached cautiously. Her hands were trembling as she held out a warm bottle. "Perhaps he needs—" "He doesn't want the damn bottle." Matilda snapped his voice, a low growl that vibrated through the cabin. He didn't shout. Men like Matilda Moretti didn't need to shout to be terrifying. "I've tried 3. He won't eat." "Maybe he's in pain." "The air pressure," Beatrice suggested, taking a step back as Matilda's bodyguard, a massive man named Rocco, who occupied seat 1B, shifted his glare toward her. "He's been screaming since we hit cruising altitude," Matilda said, looking down at the red-faced infant. For the first time in his life, Matilda felt completely powerless. He could negotiate multi-million-dollar shipping contracts, order hits on rivals and bribe government officials, but he couldn't stop this noise. "Get away. You're making it worse." Beatrice scurried away to the galley, pulling the curtain shut. Back in economy row 34, Sophie Bennett adjusted her noise-cancelling headphones, but even they couldn't block out the wailing drifting from the front of the plane. Sophie sighed, rubbing her temples. She was exhausted. She had spent the last of her savings on this ticket to Milan for a job interview. She wasn't qualified for fleeing a life in Brooklyn that had crumbled around her. She looked down at the photo on her phone's lock screen. It was her daughter, Chloe. "I'm doing this for you, baby girl," she thought. Chloe was staying with Sophie's sister back in Queens. Leaving her was the hardest thing Sophie had ever done. But the debt collectors were getting closer, and the job in Milan, a live-in tutor position for an expatriate family, was her only lifeline. "God, will someone shut that kid up?" the man next to her grumbled, slamming his magazine shut. "Rich people think they own the air." Sophie didn't answer. She listened closely to the cry. She was a mother. But before the debts and the bad luck, she had been a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai. Her ears pricked up. That wasn't a tantrum cry. That wasn't an "I'm bored" cry. That was a cry of distress. "He sounds like he's choking," Sophie whispered to herself. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is on," a passing flight attendant said, blocking the aisle. "The baby in first class," Sophie said, her voice soft but firm. "Something is wrong. I'm a nurse. Let me help." The attendant looked skeptical. "First class is restricted. Mr. Moretti made it clear no one is to disturb him." "Mr. Moretti?" Sophie felt a chill. Everyone in New York knew the name. The Moretti family owned half the construction firms in the city and all of the unions. "I don't care who he is. That baby is in trouble. If you don't let me through and something happens to that child, it's on you." The attendant hesitated, looking at the curtain, then back at Sophie's worn-out hoodie and determined eyes. The screaming from the front escalated into a gagging cough. "Fine," the attendant whispered. "But if he shoots you, don't say I didn't warn you." Walking into first class felt like stepping into a freezer. The air was icy, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. Sophie kept her head down, clutching her bag. She saw him immediately. Matilda Moretti looked like a fallen angel on the verge of violence. He was rocking the baby roughly, panic starting to crack his stoic mask. The baby Leo was turning a terrifying shade of violet. Rocco the bodyguard stood up, instantly blocking Sophie's path. His hand went to his jacket. "Back to your seat, now!" Sophie didn't flinch. She locked eyes with Matilda over the bodyguard's massive shoulder. "He's not colic," Sophie said, her voice cutting through the wails. "He's having an allergic reaction, or he's been poisoned." The word poisoned made the air leave the room. Matilda froze. He looked up, his grey eyes drilling into her. "Let her through," he commanded. "Boss, we don't know her," Rocco protested. "Look at my son, Rocco, he's not breathing," Matilda roared. Sophie pushed past the bodyguard and knelt beside the leather seat. Up close, she could see the hives forming on the baby's neck. His airway was closing. "What did he eat?" Sophie demanded, her hands moving fast. She checked the baby's pulse, thready, racing. "Formula," Matilda said, his voice trembling. "Just the formula from the bag. My private chef prepared it." "Give me the bottle." Sophie snatched the half-empty bottle from the tray table. She sniffed it. It smelled faintly of almonds. Cyanide. No too strong. Then she saw the residue on the rim. Peanut oil. Highly concentrated. "Is he allergic to peanuts?" Sophie asked, already digging into her bag. "I don't know," Matilda admitted, looking horrified. I just got custody of him 3 days ago. His mother never told me." "He's going into anaphylactic shock," Sophie said. "I need an EpiPen. Does the plane's medical kit have one?" "I don't know," Matilda yelled at the flight attendant. "Get the kit." "There's no time," Sophie said grimly. The baby's eyes were rolling back. He had stopped screaming because he could no longer draw breath. Sophie didn't hesitate. She did the unthinkable. She reached into her own battered purse and pulled out a small pediatric EpiPen. Her daughter, Chloe, had severe nut allergies. Sophie never went anywhere without it. "Hold his leg down," she ordered the Mafia boss. Matilda Moretti, a man who commanded armies, obeyed the woman in the grey hoodie without question. He pinned Leo's tiny leg against the seat. Click. Hiss. Sophie jammed the pen into the baby's thigh. Leo's eyes flew wide open. A silent, gasping second passed the longest second of Matilda's war life. Then a massive intake of air, followed by a loud, healthy, furious scream. The color flooded back into Leo's cheeks. The hives didn't disappear, but the swelling in his throat began to recede. Sophie slumped back against the cabin wall, exhaling a breath she didn't know she was holding. He's okay. He's going to be okay. But he needs a hospital as soon as we land. Matilda stared at the baby, then at Sophie. The look on his face wasn't gratitude. It was shock mixed with a dark, calculating intensity. He watched her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Who are you?" Matilda asked, his voice low. "Just a mum," Sophie whispered, closing her bag. "I'm just a mum." She stood up to leave her legs wobbly. She wanted to get back to the safety of economy, away from the expensive suits and the smell of danger. "Wait," Matilda said. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron. "You just saved the heir to the Moretti family. You think I'm just going to let you walk back to row 34? "I don't want a reward," Sophie said, trying to pull away. "It wasn't an offer," Matilda said, his eyes darkening. He looked at the bottle on the table, the poisoned bottle. "Someone tried to kill my son on this plane, which means the enemy is close. And now—" He pulled her closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Now they know you can save him. You're not going anywhere, Bella. You're under my protection now, whether you like it or not." Rocco stood up and locked the door between first class and economy. Sophie's heart stopped. She had saved the baby, but she had just trapped herself in the lion's den. For the remaining 6 hours of the flight, Sophie Bennett was a prisoner of luxury. She sat in seat 1B, the seat previously occupied by the terrifying bodyguard, Rocco. The leather was soft. The champagne offered by the trembling flight attendant was vintage Dom Perignon, but Sophie felt like she was sitting in an electric chair. Every time she moved, Rocco's eyes tracked her from the jump seat near the cockpit. But the real weight came from the man next to her. Matilda Moretti hadn't said a word since the injection. He was busy. He had connected his phone to the plane's encrypted Wi-Fi and was making silent, furious calls. Sophie couldn't hear the person on the other end, but she heard Matilda's tone. It was the voice of a man ordering executions. "The chef," Matilda whispered into the phone, his Italian accent thickening with rage. "Find him. If he's still in New York, I want him in a trunk. If he's fled, burn his house down." Sophie shivered, pulling her hoodie tighter. She looked down at the bundle in her arms. Leo was asleep. After the EpiPen, the baby had refused to go back to Matilda. The moment the Mafia Don tried to hold his son, Leo began to whimper. But when Sophie held him tucking his small head under her chin and humming a low lullaby she used to sing to Chloe, he went out like a light. "He likes you," Matilda said, suddenly hanging up the phone. He turned to face her, the cabin lights dimming as the plane began its descent over the Alps. "He's just exhausted." Sophie deflected, avoiding his intense gaze. "His body went through a trauma. He needs rest. He hasn't slept for more than 20 minutes at a time since his mother died," Matilda revealed. The admission hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. "She died in childbirth. I've been trying to run an empire and raise a child who screams every time I touch him." Sophie looked at the sleeping infant. She saw the resemblance now. Leo had Matilda's dark hair, but there was a softness to him that his father lacked. "He senses your stress," Sophie said gently. "Babies are mirrors. If you are tight, angry, and scared, he will be too." Matilda laughed a dry, humorless sound. "I am Matilda Moretti. I don't get scared. You were scared an hour ago. Sophie challenged him. Rocco shifted aggressively in his seat, but Matilda held up a hand. He studied Sophie with new interest. Most people couldn't look him in the eye. This woman in her faded jeans and sneakers had just called him out. "We are landing in Milan," Matilda said, changing the subject. "My security team will meet us on the tarmac. You will come with us." "I have a connecting train to catch," Sophie protested. "I have a job interview tomorrow at a villa near Lake Como." "Cancel it," Matilda said flatly. "I can't. I need this job." Sophie's voice rose. "I have debts. I have a daughter back in New York who is counting on me. I can't get involved in your... whatever this is." Matilda leaned in, invading her personal space. He smelled of sandalwood and gunpowder. "You are already involved, Sophie. You touched the poisoned bottle. Your fingerprints are on the evidence, and you are the only witness to an assassination attempt on my heir. If I let you go, my enemies will find you. They will torture you to find out what you know, and then they will kill you, and probably your daughter too." Sophie's blood ran cold. "You're threatening me. I'm saving your life, again." Matilda sat back as the fasten seatbelt sign pinged. "You're coming to the Moretti estate. Once I find out who tried to poison Leo, and I ensure you aren't a spy planted by the Rossi family, then maybe I'll let you go." The plane's wheels slammed onto the runway of Malpensa Airport. Sophie clutched the baby tighter. She realized with a sinking heart that she wasn't the nurse anymore. She was the hostage. The exit from the plane was a military operation. 3 black armored Mercedes G-wagons were waiting right next to the plane's stairs. Men in dark suits with earpieces swarmed the tarmac. They didn't look like airport security. They looked like a private army. Sophie was ushered into the middle vehicle. Matilda slid in next to her, taking Leo, who immediately started fussing, back into his arms. Rocco took the passenger seat in the front, racking the slide of a semi-automatic pistol. "Is that necessary?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. "Welcome to Italy." Rocco grunted. The convoy sped out of a private gate, bypassing customs entirely. They hit the highway, weaving through the late-night traffic of Milan at 100 miles per hour. Inside the car, the atmosphere was suffocating. Matilda was checking his tablet. "The chef in New York was found dead," he announced, his voice devoid of emotion. 2 bullets to the back of the head. It cleans up loose ends." "That means they know we know," Rocco said, scanning the mirrors. "Exactly." Matilda turned to Sophie. "Hand me the diaper bag." Sophie passed him the expensive leather bag. Matilda dumped the contents out onto the floor of the luxury SUV. Diapers, wipes, a pacifier, and a small blinking black disc stuck to the inside lining. "A tracker," Matilda hissed. He rolled down the window and hurled the device onto the highway. "They know exactly where we are." "Who?" Sophie cried. "The Camorra," Matilda said. "Or maybe the Russians. It doesn't matter. What matters is boom! The lead SUV in the convoy exploded. The force of the blast lifted the heavy G-wagon into the air, flipping it like a toy. It crashed down in a shower of sparks and twisted metal blocking the road ahead. "Ambush!" Rocco screamed. "Get down!" Sophie didn't need to be told twice. She threw herself over the baby in Matilda's lap, shielding Leo's body with her own. Matilda's driver slammed on the brakes, swerving violently to avoid the burning wreckage. Tires screeched, and the smell of burning rubber filled the cabin. Bullets began to ping against the reinforced glass of their window. Thwack, thwack, thwack. "They're on the overpass," Matilda shouted. He pulled a Beretta 92 FS from his holster. "Stay down." The rear SUV rammed into them, pushing them forward. The driver floored it, smashing through the guardrail and off the highway, careening down a steep, grassy embankment. Sophie screamed as the world tumbled. The heavy vehicle shook violently, suspension groaning before slamming onto a service road below. "Is the baby okay?" Matilda yelled, his hand gripping Sophie's shoulder to keep her steady. Sophie checked Leo. He was wailing, terrified by the noise but unharmed. "He's fine. He's just scared." "Rocco, get us out of here," Matilda commanded. "Tires are run flat. Boss, we can move," Rocco yelled back. The battered Mercedes roared to life, speeding away from the highway into the dark, winding back roads of the Italian countryside. Matilda looked back through the rear window. No headlights followed them. They had escaped, but only by inches. He looked down at Sophie. She was curled in a ball on the floor of the car, her arms locked around his son, her body shaking uncontrollably. She hadn't tried to save herself. She had used her body as a human shield for a child she didn't even know. For a moment, the cold, hard ice around Matilda's heart cracked. He reached down and touched her hair. "You can sit up now, Sophie. We lost them." Sophie sat up, her face, pale tears streaming down her cheeks. "You people are insane," she sobbed. "I just wanted to be a tutor. I just wanted to pay my rent." Matilda looked at her, really looked at her. "You are not a tutor anymore," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "You saved my son on the plane. You shielded him just now. You are more loyal than men. I pay $1 million a year." The car sped into the night, heading toward the mountains. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked, wiping her eyes. "The villa requires a lockdown," Matilda said. "But we aren't going there yet. It's too obvious. We are going to a safe house, a place no one knows about." "I need to call my sister," Sophie insisted. "Please." "Give me your phone," Matilda said. Sophie hesitated, then handed it over. Matilda rolled down the window and threw her phone into the darkness. "Hey!" Sophie screamed. "They can track the GPS," Matilda said calmly. "You are a ghost now, Sophie Bennett. Until this war is over, you don't exist." Sophie slumped back against the seat, defeat washing over her. She looked at Leo, who had finally stopped crying and was gripping her finger with his tiny hand. She was trapped in a foreign country with a Mafia don who had just survived a bombing, and her only ally was a 3-month-old baby. And the worst part, she realized Matilda was right. If she left now, she was dead. Her only chance of survival was the man with the gun. "What happens now?" she whispered. Matilda reloaded his weapon, the metallic click loud in the quiet car. "Now," he said, looking at the moonlit road ahead. "We go on the offensive, and you get a promotion." The safe house was not a house. It was a fortress of glass and stone built into the side of a cliff overlooking Lake Garda. It was 3 a.m. when the battered Mercedes finally crunched up the gravel driveway. The moon reflected off the black water of the lake below, peaceful and indifferent to the violence that had just occurred. Sophie was exhausted to her bones. Her adrenaline had crashed hours ago, leaving her shivering and numb. Rocco opened the door, and the cool mountain air hit her face. "Inside," Matilda commanded, his voice tight. He was still scanning the perimeter, his gun drawn. The interior was stark, modern, and cold. White marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a museum for a lonely man. "Rocco, sweep the perimeter. Check the sensors," Matilda ordered. He turned to Sophie. "Upstairs, second door on the left. It's the nursery. Put Leo down." Sophie didn't argue. She carried the sleeping infant up the floating staircase. The nursery was the only room with color painted a soft blue, filled with expensive toys that were still in their packaging. A wooden crib stood in the center, looking like an island in a sea of emptiness. She changed Leo's diaper with the supplies in the bag, rocked him for a few minutes until his breathing deepened, and laid him down. "He looks peaceful," a voice said from the doorway. Sophie jumped. Matilda was leaning against the doorframe. He had removed his jacket and his shoulder holster. His white dress shirt was stained with soot from the explosion, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms covered in tattoos, complex geometric patterns and old Latin script. Vincere vel mori. Conquer or die. "He's a good baby," Sophie whispered. "He just needs routine and safety." "Safety is a commodity I am currently short on," Matilda said, walking into the room. He stopped at the crib, looking down at his son, with a mixture of love and terrified confusion. "I have 500 soldiers. I own politicians. But I couldn't stop him from choking." "You're not a doctor, Matilda." "You're a—" Sophie paused. "A criminal," Matilda finished for her. A smirk played on his lips. "A monster. A father," Sophie corrected him. "You were panicked." Matilda looked at her, his grey eyes searching her face. "You didn't panic. In the car, you threw yourself over him." "Why?" Sophie hugged her arms around herself. "Instinct. When you're a mother, every child is your child." Matilda nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a burner phone. "I made a call on the way here. I had my people look into you, Sophie Bennett." Sophie stiffened. "You investigated me." "I investigate everyone," Matilda said coldly. "Sophie Bennett, 26 years old, former pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai. Fired 6 months ago." "I wasn't fired." Sophie snapped, her pride flaring up. "I resigned. The hours were impossible with a newborn." "Resigned. Then your husband—" "Mark." Matilda glanced at the screen. "Mark left you. Left you with $40,000 in gambling debts and a maxed-out credit card." "Stop it," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "You have no right. And now you are flying to Milan for a tutoring job that pays, what, €2,000 a month? It will take you 10 years to pay off those debts. Meanwhile, the loan sharks in Queens are threatening to visit your sister's house, where your daughter Chloe is sleeping right now." Sophie stepped forward, fury overriding her fear. She slapped Matilda Moretti across the face. The sound echoed in the quiet nursery. Sophie froze, horrified at what she had done. "You didn't slap a Mafia don. You didn't touch a man who dissolved people in acid." Matilda didn't move. He didn't even blink. He slowly turned his head back to face her. His cheek was reddening, but his eyes weren't angry. They were burning. "You have 4, he said softly. "Good. You'll need it." "Don't talk about my daughter," Sophie hissed. "I am doing everything I can for her." "I know," Matilda said. "That's why I'm offering you a job." "I don't want to work for the mob." "Not for the mob. For him." Matilda pointed to the sleeping baby. "I need a nanny. Someone who knows medical care. Someone who can protect him when I can't. Someone who isn't afraid to slap me when I'm being an idiot." "I can't stay here," Sophie said. "It's dangerous." "It's dangerous everywhere," Matilda countered. "The people who tried to kill Leo, they saw your face on the plane. If you leave, you're a loose end. If you stay, you're under my protection." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a businesslike baritone. "I will pay off your debt. All of it. The 40,000. Plus I will pay you $10,000 a week. Cash." Sophie's mouth went dry. 10,000 a week. In 1 month she could buy a small apartment. In 6 months she could set Chloe up for life. And my daughter, Sophie asked. I can't be away from her indefinitely. Once the threat is neutralized, Matilda promised, I will fly her and your sister here. Private jet, security detail. But right now this house is the only safe place in Italy. He extended his hand. It was large, rough, and dangerous. Deal. Sophie looked at the sleeping baby, then at the man who was offering her a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. She thought of the debt collectors banging on her door. She thought of Chloe. She took his hand. Deal. But if you ever mention my husband again, I'll use the other hand. Matilda actually smiled. It transformed his face, making him look 5 years younger. Understood, Nanny Bennett. 3 days passed in the glass fortress. Sophie fell into a rhythm. She took over Leo's care completely, establishing a schedule that worked miracles. She ordered organic formula, set up a sleep routine, and even got Matilda to hold the baby for skin-to-skin contact, though the Mafia boss looked as if he were holding a live grenade. But the tension in the house was palpable. Matilda spent his days in the basement war room, shouting into phones and staring at maps of Milan. Rocco prowled the grounds like a quaint tiger. On the 4th morning, Sophie was in the kitchen sterilizing bottles. The house was quiet. Matilda had left an hour ago for a sit-down with the heads of the 5 families in Turin, a risky move, but he needed to flush out the traitor. Sophie was humming to herself when she noticed something odd. A delivery van had arrived earlier, with supplies, diapers, baby food, and groceries. Rocco had checked every box, scanning them for explosives, but one box, a carton of premium baby wipes, sat on the counter. Sophie opened it. It was sealed, but the cardboard flap felt thick. She ran her finger along the edge. The glue was tacky, as if it had been resealed recently. Her nursing instincts, honed by years of noticing small details in patient charts, kicked in. She grabbed a steak knife and carefully slit the cardboard layers of the box's bottom. Inside, sandwiched between the cardboard, was not a bomb. It was a SIM card and a tiny, flat microphone. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a listening device, but it wasn't transmitting. It was recording. Why would they send a recorder in a delivery? Then it hit her. They didn't send it to listen. They sent it to be retrieved. Someone inside the house was supposed to find this, swap out the SD card, and send it back out. Or maybe... Sophie. She spun around. Marco, one of the new guards Matilda had brought in to reinforce the perimeter, was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was young, handsome in a slick way, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What do you have there?" Marco asked, stepping closer. His hand drifted toward his belt. Sophie hid the device behind her back. "Nothing. Just opening more wipes. Leo goes through them so fast." "Let me help you with the trash," Marco said, advancing. "Mr. Moretti gave strict orders. No clutter." "I can handle it," Sophie said, backing up until her hip hit the marble counter. "You look nervous, Sophie," Marco said. He was 5 feet away now. "You know it's dangerous for a pretty American girl to be all alone up here." "I'm not alone," Sophie said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Rocco is outside." "Rocco is checking the south gate. That's a 5-minute run." Marco smirked. "Give me the box, Sophie." He knew. Sophie realized with a jolt of terror that the traitor wasn't a rival Don or a distant cousin. The traitor was right here. Marco had likely planted the poison on the plane, or coordinated the ambush. and now he needed to retrieve the bug that had been recording Matilda's war room conversations for the last 3 days. "You're the one," Sophie whispered. "You told them where we were." Marco's smile vanished. He drew a knife, a long serrated combat blade. A gun would be too loud. "Smart girl," Marco hissed. "Too smart. Matilda should have left you in New York." He lunged. Sophie didn't think. She reacted. She grabbed the pot of boiling water she had been using to sterilize the bottles and threw it. "Ah!" Marco screamed, shielding his face as the scalding water splashed over him. Sophie sprinted. She didn't run for the front door. She ran for the stairs. She needed to get to Leo. If Marco killed her, he would kill the baby next to leave no witnesses. "You bitch!" Marco roared, crashing through the kitchen island. Sophie scrambled up the floating stairs, her sneakers slipping on the polished wood. She could hear Marco's heavy boots pounding behind her. She reached the landing and bolted for the nursery. She slammed the heavy oak door and locked it. But it was a standard interior lock. It wouldn't hold a grown man for long. Thud. The door shuddered as Marco threw his shoulder against it. Thud. The wood splintered around the latch. Sophie grabbed Leo from the crib. The baby woke up and started to cry. "Shh, shh, baby. I've got you," she whispered, looking frantically around the room. "We are on the 2nd floor. The window was a sheer drop to the patio stones below. No escape. Crack! The door flew open. Marco stood there, his face red and blistering from the water, the knife gripped tight in his hand. He looked like a demon. "Nowhere to run, Nanny," he snarled. Sophie backed up against the window, clutching Leo to her chest. She had no weapon, no phone, no Matilda. Marco stepped over the broken wood. "Give me the kid. I'll make it quick for him. For you. Maybe not so quick." He raised the knife. Sophie turned her back to him, curling around the baby, to take the blade herself. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bite of steel. Blum! The sound was deafening. Sophie flinched, but the pain never came. She turned around. Marco was standing still, a look of surprise on his face. A small red hole had appeared in the center of his forehead. He collapsed forward, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Behind him, standing in the hallway with a smoking pistol in his hand, was Rocco. The giant bodyguard lowered the gun, his chest heaving. He had run the 5 minutes in 2. "Rocco!" Sophie gasped, her knees giving way. Rocco stepped over the body, kicking the knife away. He looked at Sophie, then at the dead traitor. He tapped his earpiece. "Boss," Rocco said, his voice grim. "We have a problem. Marco is down. He was the mole. But he wasn't working alone." Rocco looked at Sophie, his expression grave. "He was on the phone when I shot him," Rocco said to her. "He just told the hit squad that the house is clear. They're coming. Now." Sophie looked out the floor-to-ceiling window. In the distance, winding up the mountain road, she saw the headlights. Not one car, not 2. A convoy. The war had come to the glass fortress, and Matilda was an hour away. The silence in the safe house following the gunshot was heavier than the noise itself. Sophie stood in the nursery, her chest heaving, staring at the lifeless body of Marco, the traitor, who had been smiling at her in the kitchen just minutes ago. "Sophie, listen to me." Rocco's voice cut through the ringing in her ears. He was moving with terrifying efficiency, stripping weapons off the dead man and checking the magazines. "The gunshot was the dinner bell. The convoy at the gate heard it. They aren't going to sneak in anymore. They're going to storm the place." Sophie looked down at Leo in her arms. The baby was wide awake, his large, dark eyes darting around, sensing the fear radiating from her. He wasn't crying, though. It was as if he knew that silence was the only thing keeping them alive. "How much time?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling, but her hands steady as she tightened the straps of the baby carrier against her chest. 2 minutes, maybe 3, Rocco said, moving to the wall panel. He killed the lights. The house plunged into absolute darkness, save for the slivers of moonlight cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The beautiful glass house had become a transparent coffin. "They have night vision. We don't. We have to move low and fast. If I stop, you stop. If I say run, you don't look back, you just run." "Where?" "The boathouse," Rocco whispered. "It's our only exit. The driveway is blocked." They moved into the hallway. The house, usually so sterile and cold, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Sophie kept one hand on the back of Rocco's tactical vest, the other cupped protectively over Leo's head. Crash! The sound of the front majestic glass doors shattering downstairs echoed like an explosion. Shouts in Italian drifted up from the foyer. Heavy boots crunched on the glass. "They're inside," Rocco hissed. "Change of plan. We can't use the servant stairs. They'll cut us off at the kitchen." "The laundry chute," Sophie suggested desperately. "Too small for me. You go. I'll hold them off," Rocco said, turning back toward the landing, raising his submachine gun. "No." Sophie grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Matilda told you to protect us. You can't protect us if you're dead." "Rocco, there has to be another way." Rocco looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. "The master bedroom. There's a balcony that overlooks the pool terrace. It's a 15-foot drop, but there's a trellis." "Lead the way," Sophie commanded. They sprinted to the end of the hall. Behind them, the sounds of clearing rooms' doors being kicked in furniture, overturned, grew louder. The mercenaries were efficient hunters. They burst into Matilda's bedroom. Rocco locked the door and shoved a heavy mahogany dresser in front of it. Almost immediately, the doorknob jiggled. Then a heavy thud as someone threw their weight against it. "Go!" Rocco ordered, sliding the glass balcony door open. The cold wind off Lake Garda whipped into the room. Sophie climbed over the railing. The trellis was covered in thick ivy, slippery with dew. "Hold on, Leo," she whispered into the darkness. She descended as fast as she dared, the vines tearing at her hands, her sneakers scrambling for purchase on the stone wall. Above her, Rocco fired through the bedroom door, thwip, 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 keeping the attackers at bay. He vaulted over the railing just as the bedroom door splintered open. They hit the terrace running. The pool water shimmered black and deep. "To the lake," Rocco shouted, pointing toward the dark tree line that hid the boathouse. They sprinted across the manicured lawn, a spotlight from the roof of the house, where a sniper had just positioned himself, swept across the grass. "Down!" Rocco tackled Sophie, covering her and the baby with his massive frame, just as a bullet tore up the turf inches from her head. They scrambled into the cover of the trees, breathless. Sophie checked Leo immediately. He was startled, whimpering softly but unharmed. "We're close," Rocco wheezed. He was limping slightly. "The boat is a reaver. It's fast. If we can get to the middle of the lake, we have a chance." They reached the boathouse, a cavernous stone structure half submerged in the water. The boat bobbed in the slip, sleek and mahogany. Rocco untied the lines while Sophie clambered in, huddling on the floor of the cockpit. Rocco keyed the ignition. The twin V8 engines roared to life, a sound that was powerful but tragically loud. "Hold on!" Rocco yelled. The boat surged backward out of the slip, spinning around in the open water. Rocco slammed the throttle forward. The Reaver lifted its nose and planed, tearing across the surface of the lake at 60 miles per hour. Sophie looked back. The shoreline was receding, but the danger wasn't. Two smaller tactical inflatables were peeling away from the villa's private dock. They were lighter, more agile, and they were gaining. "They're chasing us!" Sophie screamed over the roar of the wind. "I know!" Rocco yelled, banking the boat hard to the left to dodge a spray of machine gun fire that stitched a line of geysers in the water next to them. "Get down, Sophie. Stay on the floor." The chase was a nightmare of noise and adrenaline. The mercenaries were closing in on both sides, trying to box them in. Rocco was a skilled driver, but he was bleeding and he was outnumbered. "I'm losing power in the starboard engine," Rocco shouted, glancing at the dials. "They hit the fuel line." The boat shuddered and slowed. The lead pursuer vessel pulled alongside just 10 yards away. Sophie could see the men on board, masked, heavily armed eyes dead and cold. One of them raised a rifle, aiming not at Rocco, but at her, at the baby. Time seemed to slow down. Sophie looked around for a weapon. There was nothing but a flare gun on the dashboard. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. The nurse from Queens vanished, and the lioness took her place. Sophie lunged up, grabbing the flare gun. She pointed it at the driver of the other boat. "Get away from him!" She screamed, a primal sound that tore from her throat. She pulled the trigger. The flare hissed through the air, a blinding streak of red phosphorus. It didn't hit the driver, but it slammed into the center console of the inflatable boat. The magnesium sparked, igniting the spilled fuel vapors from the jerry cans strapped to their deck. Boom! The enemy boat erupted in a fireball, forcing the pilot to swerve violently away to avoid being consumed. The boat capsized, throwing the mercenaries into the freezing black water. "Holy!" Rocco stared at her wide-eyed for a split second. "Nice shot, Sophie." But the victory was short-lived. The second boat was right behind them, and they weren't distracted. They rammed the back of the Reaver, the impact throwing Sophie against the leather seats. "They're boarding!" Rocco yelled, drawing his pistol. He stood up to fire, but a burst of gunfire from the enemy boat took him in the shoulder. Rocco spun around and collapsed to the deck, his gun sliding away. "Rocco!" Sophie scrambled toward him. "Stay back!" Rocco groaned, clutching his shoulder. A heavy boot slammed onto the deck of their boat. The leader of the mercenaries, a giant of a man with a scar running down his face, stepped aboard. He held a combat knife, sneering as he looked at the wounded bodyguard and the terrified woman. "End of the line," the mercenary growled in Italian. He stepped toward Sophie, raising the knife. "Give me the child, and I'll make your death quick." Sophie backed up until her legs hit the transom. She clutched Leo so tight her knuckles were white. She had no flare gun, no weapon, nowhere to run. She looked the man in the eye. "You'll have to cut through me first." The mercenary laughed, a cold, wet sound. "As you wish." He lunged. Sophie flinched, turning her body to shield Leo, waiting for the bite of the steel. But the blow never landed. Instead, a deafening rhythmic thumping filled the air, vibrating in her very bones. The water around the boat began to churn violently into white foam. A blinding spotlight from above turned the night into day. The mercenary looked up, blinded his hand, freezing in mid-air. Descending from the darkness like an avenging angel was a black helicopter, its skids hovering just feet above the water. And standing on the skids, secured by a harness, holding a military assault rifle, was Matilda Moretti. He didn't look like a CEO. He didn't look like a sophisticated billionaire. He looked like the god of war. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. He pulled the trigger. 3 shots. Precise. Surgical. The mercenary standing over Sophie dropped backward into the lake without a sound. The helicopter pilot banked the machine expertly, the wash from the rotors nearly capsizing the remaining enemy boat. Matilda continued to fire, suppressing the other mercenaries until they threw their weapons into the water, surrendering in terror. The helicopter hovered low over the drifting Riva. Matilda unclipped his harness. It was a 10-foot drop to the deck of the boat. He jumped without hesitation. He landed in a crouch, absorbing the impact, and immediately scanned the deck. He saw Rocco bleeding, but conscious. He saw the dead enemies in the water. And then he saw her. Sophie was slumped against the stern, shaking violently, clutching the baby. Matilda dropped his rifle. He rushed to her, falling to his knees on the wet teak deck. "Sophie!" He choked out to his hands hovering over her, afraid to find an injury. "Sophie, look at me." She looked up, her eyes wide and glassy. I used the flare gun. I tried to stop them." "You did," Matilda whispered, pulling her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of smoke and lake water. "You did. You saved him. You saved everyone." He pulled back his hands, cupping her face. "Is Leo hurt?" "No." Sophie sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving her weak. "He slept through the flare. He's okay." Matilda looked at his son, then back at the woman who had walked through fire for him. He kissed her forehead, fierce and desperate. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." "How did you know?" Sophie asked. "I made the traitor talk before I left Turin," Matilda said, his voice hardening. "Marco wasn't just working for a rival family. He was working for my Uncle Vito. Vito wanted the throne. He wanted us all dead." Sophie gasped. "Your uncle, it's handled," Matilda said, his eyes dark with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. "My men in New York paid Vito a visit an hour ago. The threat is gone, Sophie. Permanently. The Moretti family has been purged." He stood up, pulling Sophie gently to her feet. He signaled the helicopter to lower the rescue basket for Rocco. "What happens now?" Sophie asked, looking at the burning wreckage on the water. I can't go back to that house. I can't do this anymore, Matilda. I'm just a nurse from Queens." Matilda looked at her, the wind whipping his hair. He took her hand, the hand that had held the flare gun. "You are not just a nurse," he said intensely. "You are the woman who defended my blood when my own blood tried to spill it. You are the only person in this world I trust." He pulled a ring from his pocket. It wasn't a diamond. It was a heavy silver signet ring with the Moretti crest, a lion holding a sword. He didn't get down on one knee. The boat was rocking too much, and the moment was too raw for romance novel gestures. This was a partnership forged in war. "I can't offer you a normal life, Sophie," Matilda said, his voice shouting over the rotor noise, but intimate in its intent. "I can't offer you safety every day, but I can offer you loyalty. I can offer you power, and I can promise that no one will ever threaten you or your daughter again." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was too big, but he closed her hand around it. "Marry me," Matilda said. "Not for the baby, not for the business, but because I cannot imagine waking up tomorrow without you fighting by my side." Sophie looked at the ring, then at the man. She thought of her old life, the debt, the fear, the loneliness. Then she looked at the man who had just jumped out of a helicopter to save her. She realized she didn't want safety. She wanted him. "My sister comes to Italy." Sophie negotiated a small, tired smile, touching her lips. "And Chloe gets a pony." Matilda laughed, a sound of pure relief that broke the tension of the night. He pulled her close and kissed her a kiss that tasted of danger and forever. "Done," Matilda said against her lips. "Let's go home." As the helicopter lifted them into the night sky, Sophie looked down at the burning wreckage on the lake one last time. The fire was dying out, swallowed by the dark water. The nurse was gone. The Queen had arrived. Wow, can you believe that Ending Sophie went from a struggling single mum in economy class to taking down mercenaries with a flare gun and becoming the Queen of the Moretti Empire? I honestly didn't expect Matilda to jump out of that helicopter. That was pure movie magic. It just goes to show that sometimes the hardest situations reveal who we really are. Sophie wasn't just saving a baby. She was saving herself. And let's be honest, we all want a love story where someone is willing to burn down the world to keep us safe.